All right, ISHR students, today we are going to be going over our first unit in macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is just another way of saying big picture economics. And we're going to be looking at measuring national income, which is sort of the first big concept in macroeconomics. And usually we measure national income with something called GDP. In German, this is called Bruttoinlandsprodukte. In English, gross domestic product. We measure this national income because we want to see, for example, if the economy is growing or shrinking. And you can kind of see on the right, you can see the top 10 economic superpowers, and you can see it's the United States, followed by China, Japan, Germany, France, United Kingdom. These countries have the highest national income in the world. And you can see on the left, too, in terms of rates of growth, China has been growing very rapidly in recent years. Same with India, Turkey, Brazil, South Korea, Argentina. So there are a lot of different countries that are growing very rapidly, and they're changing the list on the top 10, which has been changing positions, or countries have been changing positions on that list for quite a lot lately. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Let's look into our learning goals. What do we need to know by the end of the lesson, or this video lesson? One, you got to create a circular flow chart in a closed economy. It's very basic circular flow chart. It's very simple. One, you need to understand the relationship between real flows and monetary flows in the circular flow chart. You should be able to explain that flows should be of equal value, and we'll talk about that later. And finally, you need to expand the circular flow chart, and you need to make it, instead of a closed model, an open model, and you will identify the leakages and injections. So go ahead and check this out. Please take notes, and this is important stuff that you need to know. Okay, let's get into it. What is national income and how do we measure it? Well, usually most economists for a lot of years have done it with GDP. It is defined as the value of output of all final goods and services produced in an economy during a given period of time. Even if you just said the value of all final goods and services produced in an economy over a given period of time would also be acceptable. So please note what GDP is. National income is basically how we measure GDP. We add up the value of everything that we make in this country, all the goods and the services, and that kind of gives us an idea of how much value was created in our economy. We do this so that over time we can compare the GDP from one year to another. And based on those comparisons, we can see if the economy is growing or shrinking. In Germany, for example, maybe last year it was 3.2 trillion euros, and now it's 3.4 trillion euros. So you can see that the German economy has grown by a little bit over the past couple of years, or the past year. So, because GDP has gone up, national income has risen, and so that's something to note. Just know that GDP stands for gross domestic product. Another similar concept is called gross national income, or GNI, and we'll talk about that later. And really, again, we'll talk more about these next lesson, because they relate to the circular flow chart, but they're not the key. So basically, as we kind of said with GDP, when we measure GDP, we're basically measuring the final value of all goods and services. We're measuring the final value of output, basically the final value of all the goods and services. This is our national income. So basically, we measure that to calculate it. We can take that and we can put this idea of output into what's called a circular flow model. It's showing the output, how that flows in an economy. And we also, in showing this output, we show two sectors in the circular flow chart, a household sector and a firm sector. And basically, what's going to happen here is we're going to show that output flows from the firms to the households. And then something flows from the households to the firms back in sort of to compensate the firms for that flow. And so anyway, I'm going to just go ahead and skip to the next slide to kind of give you a more visual sort of depiction of how this looks. So here you can see in a closed economy, we have basically two entities. We have households and we have firms. Think about it. You look at the black arrows, those represent real flows. The red lines with the red lines are basically monetary flows. So if you look at it, you can see that in any economy, consumers spend money. That's money that flows from the households over to the firms. Now, when the consumers send that money over to the firms, in exchange, the firms send goods and services or output over to the households. So money flows from the households to the firms, and then in exchange, goods and services flow back. On the flip side, however, the households send their land, their labor, their entrepreneurship to the firms, and in compensation for that, the firms send income, or Y, back to the household. So wages, rent, dividends, and profits. So you can see that actually that each one of these factors of production has a corresponding payment or income from that. So for example, labor, the payment is wages. Land is rent. Capital is dividends or interest. And finally, entrepreneurship, profits. So for those factors of production we give to the firms, firms give us something back. So money flows from the households to the firms and then back from the firms to the households. Goods and services flow from the firms to the households, and then factors of production flow from the household to the firms. And so basically, things just keep circulating in an economy. If you were to add up all the value of the goods and services, technically, that output is the GDP. It should also be the same value as the consumer expenditure. So basically, the O should equal the E. So output should equal expenditure, which should be equal to GDP. Also, wages, rent, and dividends and profits, income basically, if you added up all the income everybody made in an economy in a year, that would also equal GDP. So you've basically got these three things: output, expenditure, and income. In an economy, they should all add up to one another. Okay. So one thing to remember is that this diagram, or this thing that I've just shown you, the circular flow, is very simplistic. It doesn't show enough of what's happening in an economy to really understand other external factors. And so there are some other flows from households to firms that will be diverted. These are called leakages. Money is sort of leaked out of the economy. Also, there's some things where money is injected into the economy.